Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Ms. Marvel, starring Iman Vellani, Matt Lintz, Yasmin Fletcher, Zenobia Shroff, Mohan Kapur, Sagar Sheikh, forgive me if I said that wrong, Rish Shah, Laurel Marsden, Ariane Moad, Alicia Reiner, Laith Nakli, and Aramis Knight, directed by Adil El Arbi Belay Mira Menon, and Charmin Obaid Chinoy. Now, before I get into this, I don't know anything about Ms. Marvel as a character, except for maybe a couple things. And the only thing I could think of for sure is she's going to appear in the Marvels next year, which I'll talk about a little bit and at the end. And she gets her powers sucked out by Rogue in one of the stories. I don't know if that's ever going to happen in this show or the movies, but let's just get into this because I know nothing about this character. Kamala Khan narrates the story of the Avengers versus Thanos as she is planning on going to AvengerCon with her parents are very strict towards Kamala as she's going to test her driving skills as she's a terrible driver like me in Jersey City. And all of this is very predictable as Kamala Khan is someone I can't relate with. Same goes with her friends Bruno, who seems very irritating in this show. Kamala's favorite superhero is Captain Marvel, as she's a fangirl. As Bruno designs her costume, and he asks Kamala to, to ask her parents about AvengerCon at dinner time. But first things first, Kamala spots a bracelet that is powerful and will give her powers later in the episode and helps her mother. And that's something that wasn't in the comic books. It was actually designed for the show and helps her mother set up her brother Amir's wedding. And this feels like a Bollywood comedy where everyone around Kamala talks about how she should get married, which is really pretentious. Kamala asks her mom and dad to go to AvengerCon, and her mother doesn't trust her as they unfortunately tell her she can't go to AvengerCon, and all the mother says to Kamala is no, and this is hitting way too close to home, to the point I can't stand it. But I have to keep going for the show, and I won't do another Screamers where I ditched that movie. The next day comes, and Kamala dresses as Captain Marvel, and her parents come in and tell her she can go as long as her father dressed as long as she goes with her father dressed as the Hulk. But Kamala says no to that, and the mother says if she doesn't go with her father, then she can't go at all, which sounds familiar for overprotective parents, as this is very hard to connect with, as it's very predictable. We learn at one point in the episode that Bruno lives alone, and I question where his parents are, which is a problem from the get go. Kamala gets a plan to sneak out to AvengerCon behind the parents' back as the day goes on and grabs the bracelet and wears it to AvengerCon. And things don't go according to plan, but they get there anyways and have a ton of fun as the competition of who wears Captain Marvel the best comes, and someone whom I'm guessing is the bully named Zoe that we saw earlier in the show is also there dressed as Captain Marvel. And the competition begins, and Kamala wears a bracelet and suddenly gets powers, and suddenly gets flash shy as Kamala's powers come in, and people cheer, and the Ant-Man head falls down after Kamala accidentally hits it with her powers. And things start crashing, and Zoe is almost killed until Kamala saved her life, which is not the greatest effects for TV. And this scene at AvengerCon looks pretty stupid. It feels pretty stupid, too. Kamala gets home and her mother-in-law not mother-in-law, her mother is in her bedroom and tells her to not focus on her fantasy. And why is this familiar? Because I've seen this before. And it alerts damage control led by Agent Deaver, as I'm not so far satisfied with the show, as this could be another teenage girl high school show. Kamala gets to school and bumps into Cameron, as well as Bruno, and gets to class, and lunchtime comes, and here's Zoe is having a party as the next scene. Kamala trains her powers and begins filming her for super strength and learns more about her powers, and this is some comedy, and that's honestly not that funny. Kamala and her friend Nakia, who also happens to go to the same school as Kamala and Bruno, go to a church service while the priest can hear them talking and get their shoes stolen, and she gets home and apologizes to her mother and asks to go to Zoe's place, and it's out of control. And Cameron is there until the cops show up, and all these scenes is as predictable as any teen movie, which after American Pie, I'm never reviewing that shit again. Excuse my French. Never. Cameron asks Kamala to give her driving lessons, and she comes home and dances because she's happy she has met a boy of her dreams, and gets a text from him, and next thing you know, her nose glows up, and Nakia tries to help her out in the bathroom. As it disappears, she comes out and talks with Nakia, and Bruno gets into Caltech in California, and I don't know if I could take this show seriously or just bust up my head laughing at how predictable all this is. After Kamala's first driving lesson, she and Cameron go out to eat until Amir and Najima, aka his fiance at the time, arrive and briefly talk with Kamala and Cameron, and this cannot be any more awkward. And this is a terribly awkward show that has nothing to do with Marvel except for some of the things that happen with Endgame. And she wants to be Captain Marvel and hears about the Avengers story, and sort of has her powers of Captain Marvel, I'll say. Kamala faints while having dinner and talks with her Nana on FaceTime while the father barges in, and I've seen this scene so many times to the point it's not funny. They go to some market where food is served while Zoe is interrogated by the damage control about the night at AvengerCon, which she was shaved by Kamala, while Kamala is at a wedding rehearsal and hears a kid almost falling into his death and tries to save his life, but he falls and breaks his ankle anyways, and she runs away and almost bumps into damage control until Cameron picks her up and is introduced to his mother. And this character of Kamala Khan is very flat, in my opinion. In British occupied India in 1942, we get an origin of the bangle bracelet on Kamala's arm and her grandmother, and it means nothing to me. We go back to present day as Kamala is with Cameron and his mother, as they don't look like they aged from being around the 1940s, which is Eternals all over again, and that's not a good thing for me to think about. Kamala learns about Cameron's family are something called the Jinn. I don't know what that is, but it's laughable. It's very laughable. Very laughable, and I never read a Ms. Marvel comic book, and I never will, and that's how uninspired I am by this show. Meanwhile, Nakia comes to Kamala's bedroom because the damage control come to the church and cause more problems with their lives, and this show is in the show, and Kamala is at another wedding reception and receives a mask, and do I care about any of this? Not really. Bruno tells Kamala about the Jinn as they're a threat as he becomes the man of the chair, which is a Batman cliche, I'll say, which is an embarrassing role for this actor, Matt Lintz, as he's been in things I've seen before and have reviewed him in the Rob Zombie version of Halloween 2, but deserves better than this role for sure. The wedding date comes for Amir and Najima, I don't know if I'm saying that wrong, please forgive me, and as it progresses to the dance floor, it's interrupted by Cameron and people after him and the Jinn as Kamala sets the fire alarm to evacuate the building, while Kamala fights the enemy off, which I never got their names, which is a real problem, while Nakia comes in the building, and so does Bruno. And Kamala finds out she has powers, or no, Nakia finds out Kamala has powers, but these powers are like Mr. Fantastic mixed with the Invisible Woman from the Fantastic Four, both of them. As Bruno helps with the fight, as Cameron's mother tries to kill Kamala until damage control comes in and they run out, and Nakia finds out Kamala is the hero on TikTok and comes home, and these effects look bad, and the fight scene is bad, and these characters are bad to watch a while the parents blame Kamala for Amir's ruined wedding, and her Nana calls her to come to India for a visit, which will lead to the next episode, and I don't like where this goes at all. Kamala and her family go on a plane to visit Pakistan to visit her nana and her family as we learn about her family members in this episode, and these scenes are dreadful. And this is and the next episode are not too necessary for 40 minutes episodes. Kamala dreams about her brother's wedding and how it was ruined by her cousins wake her up, as well as her mother, and make her visit the country and to stick with her cousins. And her cousins are kind of cruel and bad characters. Kamala goes to the train station where Kamala puts on her mask as she gets in a fight with a Pakistani ninja named Chemo, where he introduces her to the Red Daggers, which sounds like a boy band name, while they eat. And Kamala learns more about the jet, as I can't take the explanation seriously, as it's stupid. Meanwhile, Cameron and his family are at a prison led by damage control, and they escape, and Cameron is abandoned by his mother, which serves him right, as I didn't care. I don't care for any of these characters, as it's still very predictable. Chemo introduces Kamala to some of the crew of the Red Dagger, and this scene is a bad fish out of water comedy scene, in my opinion, while Kamala learns more about her powers as she's getting better at it until the jet comes. After Kamala, and we get this dull and endless chase sequence that ends with the death of not only the Red Dagger's master, but gets Kamala transported to a train station, which is a really sour note to end this episode on, leading up to a very unnecessary episode. We pick up with the flashback, starting with an old movie would, which felt weird while we learn more about India, or not India, Pakistan, or maybe India, I couldn't tell you, as we move on to British-occupied India in 1942, with a brief chase that is worthless. Meanwhile, the British invade India, and the civilians in India want to fight back against the British, as we get a female willing, I'm guessing, is Aisha, which is Kamala's great-grandmother of some kind, as a villager named Chassard helps out Aisha because she likes his roses and needs a home, and Chassard gives her all that, and she gives birth to Kamala's grandmother, I should say. And I'm guessing later in life they got married off screen, and we move on to a radio telling them the British are coming for them. And did we need an origin story of why Kamala's mother hates Aisha? Absolutely not. And that's why this is an unnecessary episode, as it's completely tragic. Aisha wants to leave India with her husband and her daughter, as she gives Kamala's mother grandmother the bracelet, as the villagers walk out to India to escape as they try to make the last train, and Aisha leaves Chassard and her daughter to only get stabbed by a mysterious woman whom I'm guessing is her mother, and this had no stakes whatsoever. Chassard abandons his daughter for a second while she's calling her for her mother, and Aisha dies with the magic of the bracelet, and we go back to Kamala finding Aisha on the ground, and Aisha dies, which isn't unbelievable because Aisha was in one timeline, which is in the past, while Kamala was in today's timeline, so that didn't come off believable. Meanwhile, Chassard gets on the train with his daughter to a different life, and we come back to the end of the chase sequence with the Jinn as they randomly die, and so does Cameron's mother, which caught me off guard while the mother keeps calling Kamala's phone, or the mother by her mother I'm talking about, Kamala's, which is a parent thing to do, as the death effects looked absolutely horrible. Kamala's mother and grandmother found Kamala as a superhero, and the grandmother accepts it, while the mother says we need to go home and spend time with the family, and that was a stupid way of accepting Kamala as a superhero, as it's very unrealistic. Back in Jersey City, Cameron hides in Bruno's place as they run from damage control until the final episode, which is going to be my nightmare come to life, as this episode was unnecessary. Kamala's back in New Jersey City while damage control searches for Cameron and Bruno as they're being chased by them, and this is before the Marvel Studios logo comes on, which is unnecessary this time, whereas the movies did it better. Kamala confesses she's a superhero to her family, and they're just as accepting as the mother was in the last episode, which is, again, very unrealistic. Nakia tells Kamala that Bruno has gone missing as Kamala suits up to find Bruno, And Bruno, along with Cameron, finds Nakia at their church and hides them, I'll say, while damage control comes to the church again and searches for the two boys, but they're not successful as they find another boy in the storage room as they escape from damage control. After they leave, which is tedious. Kamala does find Bruno and Cameron while she's in her costume and hides them as it moves on to nighttime at the high school as they find Nakia there, and damage control conveniently finds them while Zoe finds out Kamala is a superhero and helps the gang out since Kamala saved her life at AvengerCon back in the first episode, which is a cliche. Kamala, Bruno, Nakia, and Zoe, and as he appears as well as Amir, shows up to go over the plan, while damage control agent Deaver is warned not to go inside the high school by her boss, but she does anyways as she's a stupid character, and the whole gang is going over the plan, which is ludicrous. Damage control barges in the high school as they think a bomb has been planted, but instead plays music, which is very stupid, while Zoe calls everyone on TikTok to help them out at the high school. And the music choices are a bad idea to begin with for the final piece of action, and they try to get Cameron as he and Kamala hide together as Bruno gets them out and distracts damage control while they escape and hit damage control with salt balls, which is the stupidest idea I've ever heard in all my life. Kamala and Cameron almost get out as damage control agents bust in, and Cameron almost kills him while Kamala saves his life. And Kamala tells Cameron the truth about his mother dying as a group of people get held by damage control as Cameron and Kamala approach the front, and damage control fights with Cameron as Kamala tries to stop it as they knock both of them down. And Kamala fights the damage control agents, and so does Cameron, who wants to end their lives as Agent Deaver tries to shoot Cameron and gets all powerful and such, while Kamala saves everyone's lives by stopping Cameron going under the ground to the harbor, and all this feels almost too familiar as it's very predictable. Everybody in the crowd protects Kamala against the agents as she gets away with her powers, and as Agent Deaver is in trouble with her boss for going against his orders, which was to stand down, and again, predictable and horrible, which is a new word I would use. Everybody goes on TikTok to talk about Kamala and her powers, and she sees them as the family, has a party at their place. And personally, I don't have TikTok as I'm not familiar with how it works, but it got annoying, that app, after a while on this show. 1 week later, Kamala joins Nakia and Bruno as Bruno is leaving for California soon with the car as they take off, and credits roll to a mid-credits scene of Kamala transforming into Carol Danvers, returned by Brie Larson, in which I knew she was going to make a cameo in this show at some point in this, as the credits say, Ms. Marvel will return in the Marvels, which is coming next year, and that cameo was absolutely predictable. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this show a 3.4 out of 10. The show is very predictable with obvious comedy that isn't that funny at all, while the effects look bad for TV. This felt like a really disappointing move from Marvel, as this felt like a comedy that is not funny, which is so unfortunate. And as I said it last time in previous shows, Phase 4 is letting me down more and more as they keep going, which I wish they wouldn't after Endgame. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for Ms. Marvel, and until then, Avengers Assemble!